She mixed up an order. Just $33 off. But that silence cost 10 lives. The wrong order. Evening dragged on thick and noisy in the small suburban restaurant. The air was saturated with oil, burnt cheese, and cheap air freshener that only made the stuffiness worse. Through the hum of voices came laughter, clinking forks, and the muffled cough of the old cook battling another pan. Under the waiter's feet, rubber soles squeaked, while the clang of pots in the kitchen blended into a monotonous background like an out-of-tune orchestra. The tables were crowded. At one, men argued about baseball, gesturing so wildly that their glasses swayed on the edge of falling. At another, a man with a laptop complained about the slow Wi-Fi. By the window sat an eccentric client with reddish mustache, staring at his plate as though solving a geometry problem. "Tell me, is your potato cut with a ruler? Perfect little cubes. That's math class, not dinner," he said, wrinkling his nose. Sarah, hastily adjusting her apron, forced a smile. "I'll ask the cook. Maybe he's got a protractor in the kitchen." Her reply came out dry, almost sarcastic. The client nodded seriously, as if that was exactly what he wanted to hear. Sarah darted between kitchen and hall, her head buzzing with orders, voices, clattering plates. In her pocket burned an envelope. Rent due by the 1st. Earlier that day, her sister had left a voicemail. "Sarah, I'm waiting for the money. You promised." The words kept itching in her memory, tangled with the smell of sauce and the shriek of the coffee grinder. The manager, red-faced and sweaty, announced a new system. Tips now had to be sorted by bill color. Green with green, gray with gray, and order will follow, he said, wiping his forehead with a napkin printed on the restaurant's logo. Then he leaned over to a couple of guests and whispered, "Cash only. I'll give you a discount." No one doubted where those discounts went. Sarah grabbed a tray with a plate of pasta and hurried to a man in a dark suit. She didn't check the receipt, just placed the expensive dish in front of him. $45. The client nodded curtly and began to eat. Only back at the counter did Sarah realize he had ordered chicken for $12. The difference was $33. Her breath caught, palms dampened. Her eyes landed on the sign in the staff room. Camera not working. Next to it, a red LED blinked. She felt how a chain of small things, debt, her sister's voice, square potatoes, cash discounts, linked into something larger. $33 weren't yet disaster, but already the beginning of a story she would never be able to stop. The night dragged to a close. The last customers lazily poking at cheesecake delayed leaving. The waiters waited for the shift to end but kept smiling on autopilot. Sarah was wiping a sticky table when she noticed, out of the corner of her eye, Jason, the cashier, bent over the tip box. He glanced around, and his fingers quietly pulled out a $5 bill. "For the inhaler. My son needs it now, not Saturday," he muttered to himself. Sarah froze, rag in hand. report him to the manager, but she remembered her own envelope marked rent by the 1st, and her sister's voice, "You promised." Jason's $5 weren't greed, they were survival. If she exposed him, he'd lose his job and his child would lose medicine. Everyone moved to the locker room, leaving the shared box on the table. From the old TV played a training video. An actor with a plastic smile demonstrated the perfect head tilt. Tilt it 7 degrees exactly, and the client feels cared for. The line sounded as Sarah leaned toward the box, pulling out a few bills. She smirked. Her tilt had a different purpose. Back in the locker room, she tore a sheet from her notebook, scribbled, "Will return $33 as soon as I can. S." The paper trembled in her hands, a tiny confession. A minute later, she ripped it into shreds and swept it into the trash. At home, emptiness greeted her. The fridge hummed. Inside, only an expired ketchup jar and a lonely soda can. On the table, overdue power bills stamped "Final Notice." The electric meter blinked red, mocking. Sarah took off her shoes and sank onto the creaking sofa. She laid 3 crumpled bills on the table. They smelled of other people's sweat. She placed her palm over them and felt heat, as if the money knew it was stolen. Her head roared with thoughts. What if he noticed? What if they count tomorrow and know? Should I return it now? But her sister's message cut through memory. "You promised." Sarah closed her eyes. She understood. Silence had just become more expensive than any words. Morning began with a recount of tips. Again, the sums were short. First coins, then bills. The manager stood at the counter, squinting like against bright light. "Money's like water. It leaks, and we don't have a pool." No one smiled. The air hung heavy. Tom spoke first, hot-tempered as always, but this time his voice was sharp with anger. "I'm saving for an old Ford. Found a pickup on the outskirts, almost running. Promised my brothers I'd drive them to practice, and now the money's gone." Julie, tired, smelling of cheap cigarettes she used to drown pain, added, "My mom's pills aren't cheap. The pharmacist called twice already. Pay the bill." "If I'm short even 20, that's 3 days without meds. I don't work here for fun." Sarah stayed silent, feeling each word strike directly at her. A few days later, someone peeked in Tom's locker. A jar of coins toppled and clattered. All eyes turned to him. Tom blushed, lifted it. "It's gas money, for when I buy the truck." No one believed him. The glances were enough to brand him guilty. In the dining room, absurdity reigned. A young vlogger in a bright t-shirt ran around with his phone shouting, "Life hack! How to get extra sauces for free! Watch, guys, just whine and waiters always give in." He demanded 5 barbecue cups, spread them like a fan, and laughed at the camera. Behind him, waiters counted vanishing dollars and exchanged suspicious looks. Late at night, Sarah nearly confessed to Julie when they were alone in the locker room. But Julie lowered her eyes and admitted first, "I took some too, just $5, for Mom's medicine. I thought I'd return it next week." Sarah froze. Instead of confessing, she nodded and stayed silent. Now they shared a secret, and that silence weighed heavier than words. The shortages continued. Until one evening, the manager addressed staff, wiping his forehead with a damp napkin. "Call it optimization. Money's like grease in a pan. It leaks. Cut off the excess, and the kitchen's cleaner." No one laughed. They knew what it meant. Layoffs. That night, Sarah saw a scene that chilled her hands. The manager moved a wad of cash from the safe into an envelope, labeled it Night Revenue, and handed it through the back door to a courier. A minute later, the courier returned with a thinner one. Sarah snapped a photo on her phone, then panicked and deleted it. If it surfaced, she would be blamed. Meanwhile, a farce played out in the hall. A giant chicken mascot handed out flyers, dancing to music. Children clapped, adults laughed. Behind them, waiters whispered, "Who's next?" The mascot got stuck in the door, and while the cook pulled it free by its wing, Tom and Julie were handed boxes for their belongings. Tom packed car catalogs marked with his pen. Pages rustled loudly. Julie placed pharmacy receipts and dozens of crumpled checks into her box. She tried not to cry, but her eyes betrayed her. Sarah watched, her guilt crushing her chest. She knew. The avalanche was rolling, and her silence pushed every new domino. After Tom and Julie's dismissal, the restaurant felt orphaned. 2 empty lockers pressed harder than words. People worked in silence, avoiding eye contact, each fearing they were next. Fear didn't just paralyze, it spread. Peter, a young waiter with messy hair, whispered to Sarah as they cleared tables. "If they blame us anyway, what's the difference? I'll take a couple bucks, cover the shortfall. At least my conscience rests easier." He slipped a bill into his pocket without hiding. That moment turned cracks into an avalanche. One stole to return later, another not to feel stupid. Everyone had excuses, and no one believed anymore that the box held honest money. The manager invented a new, brilliant control. Staff had to sort tips nightly by bill color. Green in one stack, gray in another, blue apart. "Then everything's clear and transparent," he promised, wiping his forehead with the branded napkin. Absurdity became routine. Stacks toppled, bills got swapped, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. Totals grew messier, suspicions sharper. Soon a mystery guest appeared. Staff braced for a strict check, but the audit was a farce. A suited man ordered 3 sauces, wrote in his notebook, "Overly polite head tilt." That was all. Of course he missed the shortages. At night, waiters laughed nervously. "Well, at least we know we're too polite." The laughter died fast. Sarah tried to return part of the money. She put a 20 and a 5 in the box, hoping to plug the gap. But the reports came out mismatched. Her bills didn't line up with what was missing. Now her colleagues were sure the thief was playing with them. Late that night, passing the back room, Sarah noticed another LED blinking. A camera at a different angle captured both her and the manager with his envelopes. She froze, then quickened her step, pretending she hadn't seen. Dominoes kept falling. Each bill, each silence pushed the next to collapse. The restaurant was half empty that evening, the air heavy, only the cash register clicking. One of the fired students returned, eyes red, voice shaking with rage. "Show the cameras. I'm tired of being branded a thief." The manager smirked, agreed. On screen, from the first camera, Sarah pulling bills. He slapped the table. "There's the thief. Case closed. Fire her." Colleagues stayed silent. No one met Sarah's eyes. But Lucas, the cook, said, "There's another recording." He switched cameras. On screen, the manager, swapping envelopes, one thinner than before. The image, undeniable. Silence fell, broken only by the fridge's hum. Sarah could have stayed quiet, could have looked away, let the manager fall alone. Instead, she said, "I took money too. For rent, for debts. I'm guilty. But so is he." The manager turned crimson. "Fake! Old cameras! Editing!" he shouted, but his voice cracked. A colleague sighed. "And we thought money just evaporated." The next day, the manager was suspended. An investigation began. Sarah lost her job, along with the rest, but so did he. Half the fired staff were already seeking new work, families left without income. The victory was hollow, like an empty cake box after a party. The restaurant went on as if nothing had happened. Guests ate burgers, laughed, forks clinked. Behind the wall, life bustled on, but in the back room, silence reigned. Waiters left without farewells, walking quickly as if fleeing. Sarah stayed alone, sitting at a wall table. She spun an empty salt shaker in her hands. Laughter rang faintly through the door, muffled, like from another world. She raised her eyes and saw a lamp flickering like the red LED of a camera. She knew, from now on things would change, but not for the better. The restaurant closed quietly. On the door hung a sign, "Closed until further notice." Around the block, they said the tax office found holes in the books. It all started with a complaint about the second tape. Where once the chicken mascot had danced, overturned chairs now gathered dust. Sarah found work at a cheap roadside diner. Night shifts dragged endlessly. The smell of burnt bacon, sticky tables, rare customers. Trucks rumbled past the windows. The coffee machine sighed like an old man. One night, a new waitress mixed up an order, brought a steak instead of a sandwich. The mistake cost $33. The client stayed silent, ready to eat. Sarah quietly pulled her shift's tips from her pocket, crumpled and smelling of coffee, slipped them into the register, and whispered, "Correct check." No one heard. The client ate on, but for her it was the end point. The difference was not in money, but in choice, to stay silent or to act. She looked up and noticed a camera's LED blinking in the corner. At home, she still had an empty jar marked "for a rainy day." But now she knew, not everything is measured in dollars. Sometimes the price is set by what you do when no one is watching.